Beneath the gilded domes and soaring minarets of the Ottoman Empire, a darker current flowed. It was a civilization of breathtaking art, profound faith, and formidable armies, but also of chilling brutality. In an age where power was absolute, the methods of maintaining order were designed not just to punish, but to carve fear into the very soul of the populace. This is not a tale of sultans and their grand conquests. This is a journey into the shadows of the public square, the echoing silence of the execution block, and the dungeons where a man's world could be undone in an instant. We will explore the horrifying artistry of Ottoman punishment, where justice and terror were often two sides of the same blood-soaked coin. The sun would set over Constantinople, painting the golden horn in hues of fire and amber. The call to prayer would echo from 1,000 minarets, a sound of peace and devotion. But as dusk settled, the whispers in the labyrinthine streets of the city would change. They spoke of power, of wealth, of intrigue, and of the swift, terrifying hand of the Sultan's law. The Ottoman Empire was a sprawling tapestry of cultures, languages, and faiths, held together by military might and an unshakable bureaucracy. To govern such a vast and often unruly domain, a clear message had to be sent. Defiance would not be tolerated. Justice was not a quiet, private affair. It was theater, a grand, gruesome performance for all to see. Each punishment was a carefully chosen symbol. It was a story told in flesh and blood, a lesson etched into the collective memory of the people. The methods, while gruesome to our modern sensibilities, were the bedrock of social control, a constant, looming reminder of the consequences that awaited those who dared to step out of line. From the highest vizier to the lowliest peasant, everyone knew the rules. They saw the results of breaking them at the city gates, in the bustling marketplaces, and in the grim silence that followed a public sentence. This was the unseen price of imperial grandeur, a system of control built on a foundation of profound and unforgettable fear. Imagine a traitor, a man who whispered secrets to the enemy, whose actions threatened the very stability of the state. For him, a quick death was too merciful. His crime was one of vision, a corrupt vision of the future. The punishment, therefore, would be a literal and symbolic extinguishing of all vision. He would be sentenced to eye gouging. The condemned would be dragged into a sun-bleached public square, the stones hot beneath his bare feet. The crowd would form a silent, suffocating circle, their faces a mixture of horror, pity, and morbid fascination. He would be bound to a post, his head forced back, his eyes wide with a terror that could curdle blood. The air, thick with a smell of sweat and dust, would suddenly grow still. The executioner, often a stoic, impassive figure, would approach not with a sword, but with smaller, more intimate instruments. A sharpened spoon, a heated hook, or a specialized blade. There was a horrifying deliberation to the act. It was not a swift stroke, but a methodical unmaking. The screams, they would echo off the stone walls, a sound no one would ever forget. The great Ottoman traveler Evliya Çelebi wrote of such scenes. He described men, once powerful, reduced to sightless, helpless figures, forced to navigate a world of eternal darkness. It was a fate considered by many to be worse than death. The punishment didn't just end a life of crime. It erased the man's ability to even perceive the world, rendering him a living ghost, a permanent walking warning to all. Beheading was the grim signature of Ottoman authority. It was common, efficient, and deeply symbolic. For crimes against the state, for rebellion, for the highest forms of betrayal, the sword, or the axe, delivered the Sultan's final, non-negotiable judgment. It was the ultimate display of power, a clean, sharp line drawn between order and chaos. These executions were grand, public spectacles. A scaffold would be erected in the shadow of a great mosque or palace. The condemned, often a person of note, would be led through the throng. The crowd was an essential part of the ritual, their presence amplifying the gravity of the sentence. They were there to witness, to remember, and to fear. Consider the fate of Sheikh Bedreddin in 1420. A mystic, a scholar, and a former judge, He led a populist uprising against Sultan Mehmed I, calling for social justice. His movement threatened the very fabric of Ottoman rule. When his rebellion was crushed, his fate was sealed. His status meant nothing in the face of such a direct challenge to the Sultan's authority. He was brought to the town of Suez. The air was cold, the crowd silent. There was no rage, only a heavy, somber finality. The executioner's sword, a gleaming arc of polished steel, fell in a single, swift motion. The sound, a wet, percussive thud, was followed by a collective gasp from 1,000 throats. His head was displayed, a chilling message that not even piety or intellect could shield one from the state's wrath. But this wasn't confined to formal executions. On the battlefield, beheading was a tool of psychological warfare. After a victory, the heads of enemy commanders and soldiers would be collected, piled into grotesque pyramids, or sent back to the capital on pikes. It was a gruesome proof of victory, designed to shatter enemy morale and broadcast the terrifying might of the Ottoman war machine. Not all punishment was meant to be lethal. For lesser offenses, for breaches of discipline within the army, for disobedient slaves, or even unruly students in a madrasa, there was the asterisk falaka. This method, while not as final as beheading, was an intimate and excruciating lesson in pain and humiliation, one that left no permanent scars but etched itself deep into the victim's memory. The falaka asterisk was a wooden beam or frame designed to hold the feet in the air, exposing the sensitive soles. The offender would be held down, their ankles locked in place, utterly vulnerable. The instrument of pain was a simple wooden rod or a thin, flexible cane. The punishment was the bastinado, a relentless beating on the soles of the feet. Imagine a young Janissary recruit caught sleeping on watch. He wouldn't be executed, but his negligence required correction. He would be brought before his unit, his boots and socks removed. The strikes, administered by a stern officer, were not frenzied but rhythmic, deliberate. Each crack of the rod was a punctuation mark and a lesson of discipline. The pain was searing, a fiery agony that shot up the legs. The victim would writhe and clench his jaw, trying to stifle his cries in a show of strength, but the pain was overwhelming. After a dozen or 24 strikes, he would be released, unable to walk, his feet swollen and bruised. He would spend days in agony, every step a reminder of his failure. It was pain as a tool of education. The brilliance of the asterisk falaka asterisk, from the state's perspective, was its temporary nature. It inflicted maximum pain and public humiliation without permanently damaging a valuable asset, whether that was a soldier, a slave, or a student. It was a sharp, brutal sting designed to correct behavior and reinforce the hierarchy, ensuring that the rules, no matter how small, were always obeyed. For the common criminal, the murderer, the brazen thief, the public agitator, a different kind of public theater awaited. Hanging was a widespread and potent symbol of justice across the empire. It was less noble than the sword, a dirty, suffocating death reserved for those who disrupted the civil order. Its power lay in its lingering presence. Gallows were often erected at the crossroads of major trade routes, at the gates of the city, or in the very marketplace where a theft had occurred. The execution itself was a grim affair. A coarse rope, a rickety platform, the reading of the sentence, and then the sudden drop. The crowd would watch the convulsive dance of death, a morbid silence falling over them. But the punishment did not end with the final breath. The bodies were often left to hang for days, sometimes weeks. They became a part of the city's landscape, a permanent, decomposing warning. The wind would make the ropes creak, a sound that could make a traveler's blood run cold. Crows and other carrion birds would gather, their dark shapes a macabre punctuation to the scene. Sometimes, the method was made even more gruesome. Instead of a simple rope, a large, sharp hook, known as a sungul, would be used. The victim would be hoisted into the air, impaled through the jaw or ribs, and left to die a slow, agonizing death from shock and blood loss. This variation was reserved for the most despised criminals, turning their end into a truly horrifying spectacle. To walk past a city gate and see these dangling figures, their features distorted, their bodies turning in the breeze, was to receive an unspoken lesson. The state was always watching. The law had a long, unforgiving memory, and its final embrace was a suffocating rope or a cold, sharp hook. Every creak of the gallows was a whisper, "Obey." Property was sacred in the Ottoman system, and theft was not merely a crime against an individual, but a disruption of the social and economic order. For this, the punishment was devastatingly literal. Amputation. The hand that stole would be taken, a permanent and public mark of shame that the offender would carry for the rest of their life. The sentence was often carried out in the very place the crime was committed, the bustling, chaotic souk, or marketplace. Imagine the scene. The air is thick with the scent of spices, roasting meat, and perfume. Suddenly, a commotion. A thief is caught, a loaf of bread or a purse of coins in his possession. Justice is swift. A local qadi, or judge, pronounces the sentence on the spot. There is no sterile operating room. The thief's arm is held down on a butcher's block or a simple wooden stump. The crowd presses in, a wall of curious and judgmental eyes. The instrument is a heavy cleaver or a sharp axe. The blow is quick, followed by a choked scream and the sickening thud of the severed hand falling into the dust. The ordeal was not over. To prevent the thief from bleeding to death, the stump would be immediately cauterized. A brazier of glowing coals would be ready, and a red-hot piece of iron or a ladle of boiling oil would be pressed against the open wound. The smell of burning flesh would mingle with the market's aromas, an unforgettable scent of brutal justice. From that day forward, the man was a pariah. The empty sleeve or the scarred stump was a brand, a story told without words. He could never hide his past. Every person he met would know what he was. This punishment didn't just prevent him from stealing again. It surgically removed him from the fabric of respectable society, a living scarecrow to warn others of the price of theft. In the intricate, power-obsessed world of the Ottoman court, some crimes demanded more than death. For threats of a dynastic nature, for certain sexual crimes, or for the ultimate political humiliation of a rival, there was a punishment more terrifying than any other: emasculation. It was an act that did not just kill the body, but annihilated a man's identity, his lineage, and his future. This was not a public spectacle. It was a grim, private procedure, often carried out in the damp, torchlit confines of a palace dungeon. It was reserved for threats that were deeply personal to the sultan or the state. A disgraced vizier who grew too ambitious, a distant cousin with a dubious claim to the throne, or a guard who breached the sanctity of the harem. The act was a brutal, swift removal of the testicles and sometimes the entire genitalia. It was a complete and total unmaking of the individual. In the profoundly patriarchal Ottoman society, a man's worth, power, and social standing were inextricably linked to his virility and his ability to produce heirs. To be deprived of this was to be rendered less than a man, to be made a non-entity. The psychological devastation was absolute. The victim, if he survived the immense blood loss and risk of infection, was forever changed. His voice might alter, his body might soften. He was a ghost in his own life, a living testament to the Sultan's absolute power to not only take a life, but to erase a man's very essence. The eunuchs who famously guarded the Sultan's harem were often created through this process, typically as slaves from a young age. But when used as punishment on a grown man, it was the ultimate form of retribution. It was a statement that the Sultan's power extended not just to life and death, but to the very definition of a man's existence. There is one punishment that has become legendary in its horror, a method so vile that its name alone evokes images of unspeakable agony: impalement. Though famously used against the Ottomans by their nemesis, Vlad the Impaler, they were not strangers to this terrifying tool of suppression themselves. It was the ultimate weapon of terror, reserved for the most hated enemies of the state. Impalement was a slow, torturous execution designed for maximum suffering and maximum psychological impact. A long, thick, sharpened wooden stake would be prepared, its tip often oiled to ease its horrific passage. The condemned was forced onto the stake, which was inserted through the rectum and then slowly, painstakingly driven upwards through the body. The executioner's skill was in avoiding vital organs, ensuring the victim did not die quickly from blood loss. The stake would travel through the abdominal cavity, its point eventually emerging from the chest, the shoulder, or even the mouth. The victim, writhing in unimaginable pain, was then hoisted upright, the stake planted in the ground, leaving them to die under their own weight. Death could take hours, even days. The victim remained conscious, exposed to the elements, pecked at by birds, and stared at by a horrified populace. The Ottomans used this method to crush rebellions in their territories, particularly in the Balkans. A field of impaled bodies, a grotesque forest of the damned, was the most powerful message a commander could send to a defiant population. It was a punishment that transcended mere execution. It was a declaration of absolute merciless domination. It was designed to break not just the bodies of the rebels, but the spirit of anyone who might ever consider defying the empire. The image of a man dying on a stake, silhouetted against the sky, was a memory that would haunt generations, ensuring compliance through pure, unadulterated terror. The blood has long since been washed from the cobblestones. The gallows have rotted away, and the executioner's sword now lies behind museum glass. The Ottoman Empire, in all its grandeur and its terror, is a ghost of history. Yet, the echoes of its brutal justice still linger, a chilling reminder of the lengths to which power will go to preserve itself. These methods, gouging, beheading, amputation, impalement, were more than just punishments. They were a language of power, spoken in the currency of pain and fear. They were a reflection of a world where order was fragile, and the tools to maintain it had to be sharp, visible, and terrifying. Each scream in a public square was a lecture on obedience. Each body left hanging was a new page in a textbook of control. As we look back from the safety of our modern world, it is easy to judge. But to understand the Ottomans, we must understand the world they inhabited. In their eyes, this was not mindless cruelty. It was a necessary, if terrible, surgery on the body politic, cutting out the cancer of crime and rebellion to save the whole. These stories force us to confront the complex, often brutal relationship between justice, power, and fear. They remind us that the foundations of great empires are often built not just with stone and gold, but with the grim and effective tools of control. The shadows of the past are long, and they hold lessons that we would be wise to remember